The restaurant lights blurred as Ethan Cole stared at the empty chair across from him, realizing that the silence had finally said what the messages never would. He had shaved too carefully, worn the only suit that still fit him like a promise, and trusted a stranger's kindness enough to believe that tonight might be different. Instead, the clock kept moving, the waiter kept glancing, and the single dad who had learned how to survive disappointment felt that old, familiar ache settle back into his chest. Before the story unfolds any further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet miracles that can change a life, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel. And tell us in the comments where you are watching from, because stories like this connect hearts across the world. Ethan had not wanted the blind date. It had been arranged in secret by his sister-in-law, who believed that grief was not meant to be permanent and that loneliness should never become a home. He had resisted, not because he did not want love, but because love had once been taken from him so abruptly that it felt dangerous to want it again. 3 years earlier, his wife Lily had died during a winter storm that turned the highway into glass. In one night, Ethan had become both mother and father to their 6-year-old son Noah, a role he accepted without complaint but carried with quiet exhaustion. His days were filled with packed lunches, school runs, overtime shifts at the warehouse, and late nights folding laundry with the television murmuring to an empty room. The blind date had been pitched as simple and harmless. A quiet restaurant, a woman named Claire, no pressure. Ethan had agreed on one condition: no photos exchanged, no expectations built in advance. He wanted to meet someone as he was now, not as the man he used to be when Lily was alive and the world felt generous. So he arrived early, straightened the cutlery, and practiced breathing through the nerves that surprised him by their intensity. He checked his phone once, then twice, then stopped. He knew the signs. Ghosting had become a language everyone spoke fluently, and tonight he was apparently the one meant to learn its lesson again. When he finally stood to leave, embarrassment burned hotter than anger. He paid for the untouched meal across from him, apologized to the waiter for taking up space, and stepped out into the night where the city hummed with other people's lives. The cold air stung his face, and he told himself that this was fine, that disappointment was survivable, that Noah would be asleep by now and need him in the morning. He walked toward the parking lot, shoulders heavy, already composing the lie he would tell his sister-in-law to spare her guilt. That was when a woman approached him from the sidewalk, her coat dusted with rain, her expression unsure but determined. She was not dressed for a date, more like someone who had come from a long day of work and was still carrying its weight. Ethan nearly sidestepped her, assuming she was asking for directions or spare change, but something in the way she looked at him made him pause. She studied him as if recognizing a face from a dream, as if measuring courage against fear, and then she asked him a question that stopped the world around them. She asked whether he would be her husband instead. The sentence made no sense at first. Ethan blinked, certain he had misheard, certain that exhaustion had finally tipped into absurdity. He glanced behind him, expecting laughter or a camera crew or some cruel prank. But the street was ordinary, and the woman's eyes were not playful. They were tired, earnest, and somehow hopeful in a way that felt fragile. She introduced herself as Margaret Hale, and though the situation was strange beyond explanation, there was no mockery in her posture. She spoke quickly, as if afraid that silence might undo her bravery, explaining that she had come to the restaurant for her own reasons and had seen him sitting alone, waiting that Margaret's life, it turned out, was also caught between obligations and quiet despair. She was 36, the sole guardian of her younger sister's daughter after an illness had taken her sister too soon. She worked as a legal assistant by day and cared for 9-year-old Emily by night, juggling schedules, bills, and the constant fear of failing someone who depended entirely on her. A family trust tied to an inheritance had one rigid condition: Margaret had to be married within the year to remain Emily's legal guardian. The clause had been written by a conservative grandfather who believed stability came in traditional shapes, and lawyers had confirmed that fighting it would take years they did not have. Margaret had been set up on her own blind date that evening by a well-meaning colleague, but the man had never arrived. She had waited, humiliated, rehearsing the same thoughts Ethan had just endured. When she stepped outside to leave, she saw him, another person abandoned by expectations, another soul trying not to show how much it hurt. The idea that struck her was reckless, unreasonable, and desperate, but desperation had a way of clarifying what mattered. She did not need romance that night. She needed trust, decency, and someone who understood responsibility. Ethan listened, stunned, as the impossible began to feel oddly grounded. He thought of Noah, of how many forms family could take, of the way life had taught him that plans rarely arrived as expected. He also thought of the risks, the legal tangles, the potential heartbreak. He was a man who packed lunches and read bedtime stories, not someone who leapt into strangers' lives. And yet, something in Margaret's story echoed his own losses, his own fierce loyalty to a child who had no one else. They stood there for a long time, two adults measuring the cost of hope against the certainty of regret. They did not decide everything that night. Instead, they agreed to talk, to meet with lawyers, to introduce their children carefully, to treat the idea not as a fairy tale, but as a partnership built on honesty. The first meeting between Noah and Emily was awkward and sweet, marked by shy smiles and shared crayons on the living room floor. Ethan watched as Margaret knelt to Emily's level with the same patience he used with Noah, and something unknotted in his chest. Margaret noticed the way Ethan never raised his voice, how he listened more than he spoke, how he carried grief without letting it harden him. Weeks passed with cautious steps. Paperwork was reviewed, boundaries were drawn, and fears were voiced in late-night conversations over tea. Ethan struggled with guilt, wondering whether moving forward meant leaving Lily behind. Margaret wrestled with the fear that she was using someone's kindness to solve her crisis. But slowly, the arrangement began to feel less like an arrangement and more like a shared life. The children laughed together, arguing over cartoons and inventing secret handshakes. The house filled with noise again, the kind that healed without asking permission. When they married at a small courthouse ceremony, there were no grand promises spoken aloud, no illusions of instant love. There were hands held firmly, eyes meeting with mutual respect, and a vow made quietly inside each heart to protect what they were building. Over time, affection grew in the spaces left by honesty. Ethan found himself smiling more easily, waking with purpose rather than obligation. Margaret discovered that leaning on someone did not mean losing herself. They were not each other's replacements for what had been lost. They were companions choosing to move forward together. The day the trust was secured and Emily's future was safe, Margaret wept with relief, and Ethan held her without needing words. He understood then that love did not always announce itself with fireworks. Sometimes it arrived disguised as responsibility, as patience, as the courage to ask an impossible question on a cold sidewalk. Their marriage did not erase pain, but it gave pain a place to rest. Years later, when Noah and Emily stood taller than either of them and life felt fuller than Ethan had dared to imagine on that ghosted night, he would remember the empty chair and the woman who changed everything by refusing to walk past a stranger's sadness. He would understand that being stood up had not been rejection, but redirection, a necessary silence before the right voice found him. If this story is touching your heart right now, if it reminds you that broken beginnings can still lead to beautiful endings, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to the channel so more stories like this can reach those who feel alone. Please comment below and tell us whether you believe fate sometimes works through the most unexpected moments. Ethan never stopped believing that love was fragile, but he learned it was also resilient, capable of growing in the aftermath of loss and blooming where no one thought to look. And somewhere out there, on another quiet night, another empty chair might just be the place where two lives finally find each other.